This episode is brought to you by PayPal. You had plans for the last days of summer. And back-to-school shopping has its own plans. School supplies, dorm essentials, your list doesn't stop. Neither does the spending. But when you pay in full with PayPal, you can pay over time. No interest, no fees. Check out with PayPal and get back to summer. Subject to approval. Learn more at paypal.com/payinfor. PayPal Inc. NMLS 910457.
This is a Bose moment. You've been there. Small talk's going nowhere, but then the Bose speaker kicks in. Music you can feel fills the room, and no more chat with Danny from accounts. Your life deserves music. Your music deserves Bose. Find your perfect product at Bose.com.
Hello and welcome to the program, UFO Warning. In this episode, we're talking about Dr. Leir and his alien implants. That's correct, Dr. Leir and his alien implants. Now, Dr. Leir was a podiatric surgeon. He lived from 1935 to 2014, so he's been gone for a few years, but what a great guy he was. He wrote this book called The Aliens and the Scalpel. It's online. You can look it up if you like. It's really interesting. He did so much cool work helping people who had claimed to have been abducted and then taking what they believed and what he believed were alien implants out of these people. And there are a couple cases that really stick out. This first one, I like to call it the alien implant found inside her foot. This lady, she really has something going on. Now, there are stories about alien abductions that are easy to dismiss, and you know, somebody sees strange lights in the sky, or someone wakes up in the middle of the night and remembers a strange experience. Maybe someone says they were taken aboard a UFO, but then there are cases involving something physical, something that can supposedly be held in your hand, and that's what makes the story of Patricia Conley so fascinating, I think, because according to the evidence presented by podiatrist and UFO investigator Dr. Roger Leir, a tiny metallic object was surgically removed from inside her foot. What Leir claimed to discover surrounding that object was even stranger. A biological-looking membrane, a material that was reportedly extremely difficult to cut. This object reportedly fluoresced bright green under ultraviolet light, and there was laboratory testing that Leir said revealed unusual characteristics. Now, if you're a skeptic, you can look at this case and say there are conventional explanations, and that's fair. But if you're willing to consider the possibility that some people really have encountered something non-human, Patricia Conley's case raises a disturbing question. What if some alleged alien abductees really are carrying physical evidence of what happened to them? Now, we're going to go through this case from the beginning to the end, and you can decide what you think. As always, I'm not trying to tell you what you have to believe or don't believe. Patricia Conley reportedly had an unusual experience decades before her alleged alien implant was discovered. According to the accounts surrounding the case, she said she had experienced an alleged encounter with extraterrestrial beings approximately 27 years before the surgery that would eventually remove the object. That means we're potentially talking about the late 1960s, and there's something important about that timeline. She wasn't claiming that she had an encounter one night and discovered an implant the next morning. Nearly 30 years reportedly had passed, and whatever happened to her, she apparently went on her life without really paying too much attention. Then something changed. An X-ray revealed that there were foreign objects inside her foot. And according to the case investigators, Patricia had not undergone surgery that would explain their presence. That immediately raised a question. How did they get there? The case eventually came to the attention of UFO investigator Daryl Sims. We've talked about Daryl Sims on the program before. Very interesting work he does. Sims had become interested in alleged alien abduction cases involving physical evidence, and he eventually brought Patricia's case to the attention of Dr. Roger Leir. Leir was a podiatric surgeon who became one of the most controversial figures in the investigation of alleged alien implants. Well, controversial, especially to the people that don't believe, because Dr. Leir was just going in there and getting this stuff, and people really couldn't explain it. He didn't simply interview people who claimed to have been abducted. Dr. Leir actually performed surgery on quite a few of them. And on August 19th, 1995, Leir and his surgical team operated on Patricia Conley. What they found was remarkable. There wasn't just one object, there were two. Both were located in her left big toe. One was described as a tiny, dark gray metallic object. It was extremely small, only a few millimeters across, and was described as having a triangular or star-like appearance. The second object was even smaller. It reportedly looked something like a tiny cantaloupe seed. Now, if that's all there was to the story, it would already be interesting, but according to Leir, the objects had something else in common. They were surrounded by a strange membrane. Think about what that means. A foreign object inside the human body normally produces some sort of biological reaction. The body recognizes that something doesn't belong there, and it can produce inflammation or scar tissue, a capsule around the foreign material. That's how the human body protects itself. But Leir believed the material surrounding these objects was different. He described a dark gray, shiny membrane surrounding the objects, and he reported that the material was surprisingly difficult to cut. According to accounts of the surgery, even a new surgical blade had difficulty penetrating it. I want you to imagine being in that operating room. The surgeon is expecting to remove a tiny foreign object. Instead, he encounters something wrapped in an unusual material that doesn't behave the way he expects. What exactly was it? Was it simply an unusual biological tissue? Could it be scar tissue? Could it even be some kind of foreign material? Or was it something deliberately constructed around the object? Well, we just don't know. But that's precisely why this case remains so fascinating. And then the investigators examined the objects under ultraviolet light. According to Leir's account, the objects reportedly fluoresced a brilliant green. Again, fluorescent doesn't automatically mean extraterrestrial. There are plenty of ordinary substances that fluoresce under ultraviolet light, but combined with everything else being reported about these objects, Leir considered the reaction unusual. The objects also appeared metallic. So now the investigators had something physical, something that had been removed from a living human being, something that had apparently been inside her foot for an unknown period of time, perhaps a couple decades, and something they could potentially send to laboratories for analysis. That's exactly what they did. Now, this is where the story gets even more interesting. Leir reported that the objects were subjected to metallurgical analysis, including testing that he associated with Los Alamos National Laboratory and additional examinations at New Mexico Tech. According to the published descriptions, one of the objects consisted of tiny metallic components arranged in a configuration resembling a T. One portion contained an iron-based core, and that core was described as being unusually hard. Other descriptions referred to additional layers of material surrounding the core. If these findings were accurately reported, we're no longer talking simply about an unexplained piece of metal. We're talking about a manufactured object with a complex structure. Of course, that raises another question. Who or what manufactured it? Always brings us back to the original question of who made who. Now, here's where I think the Patricia Conley case becomes really important, because the central question isn't necessarily, is this alien? The central question is, what is it? If somebody finds an ordinary piece of metal inside their body, there are countless possible explanations. It could be a piece of shrapnel, a fragment of glass, it could be some surgical material, a piece of industrial debris, something that entered the body accidentally. But if investigators can demonstrate that the object has unusual construction, unusual materials, and unusual biological characteristics, then we have something worth investigating, and that's what Leir believed he had. He believed these objects represented physical evidence of extraterrestrial intervention, and he believed they could be implants. And he wasn't alone. Leir eventually became one of the best-known doctors investigating alleged alien implants. He performed surgeries on numerous people who believed they had been implanted during encounters with non-human beings. Some of the objects turned out to have conventional explanations, and others remained controversial, and some were reported to have unusual properties. But Patricia Conley's case remained one of the cases he considered especially significant because of the alleged history, also because of the location of the object and because of the biological material surrounding them, and because of the laboratory analysis that was reportedly performed. I mean, when you get right down to it, you have to ask yourself, why would these things even want to be putting these implants in us? Is it just for tracking? Is it for monitoring, for biological experimentation? Maybe it's something that we haven't even imagined, but we don't know. And that's what I think really makes this whole subject so unsettling. Because if the alien abduction phenomenon is real, we may be looking at something far more complicated than flying saucers. We may be talking about biological interaction between human beings and intelligence we don't even understand yet. And even if a small percentage of alleged implant cases turn out to involve genuinely unexplained technology, I think that would completely change the conversation. Because right now, everything seems to be mostly directed at nuts and bolts stuff, with a few people starting to look at these things as being interdimensional or maybe being somewhat nefarious. But these implants, to me, that's the key, and I think that's why maybe there's not that much conversation about them from the mainline UFO community. Now let's take a look at another case here. Here's another case from Leir'S book called The Implant That Escaped from His Body. There are stories about alien implants that sound almost impossible to believe, but occasionally one comes along that makes you stop and ask a different question. What if the evidence really was there? Not a photograph, not a blurry light in the sky, not a memory recovered decades later under hypnosis, but an actual physical object, something you could hold in your hand, something that had supposedly been inside a human body for decades. And that's the story of Richard Price. Now, Price's story begins in 1955. He was just 8 years old. He was living in the Troy, New York area when he says he encountered something that would change his life forever. According to Price, he was outside near a cemetery when he encountered strange beings. What happened next sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie. He claimed he was taken aboard a craft, and while inside that craft, he said he was subjected to some kind of examination. Then something even stranger happened. Price said the beings implanted a tiny object inside his body, and according to his later recollections, the object was placed, well, in his penis. Now, I know that sounds weird, but that's precisely why this case is so difficult to forget. Because like abduction stories, Price eventually claimed that he had something physical to show for it, something that would remain with him for more than 3 decades. For years, Price apparently lived with the object inside his body. Then in 1981, something happened that changed the story. A physician examining Price discovered what appeared to be a foreign object beneath the skin. There was apparently no obvious explanation for how it had gotten there. The doctor reportedly recommended leaving it alone because it wasn't causing him significant discomfort. So Price did, and the object remained inside him for years. I mean, think about that. An 8-year-old boy claims that something was put inside his body during an encounter with strange beings. Decades later, a doctor discovers a physical object in precisely the location where Price said he had been implanted. Now, that alone doesn't prove aliens, but it certainly makes the story harder to simply ignore. Then came 1989. Nearly 34 years after the alleged encounter, Price noticed something strange. The object appeared to be working its way toward the surface of his skin, and eventually it began protruding from his body. Oh, man.
This episode is brought to you by PayPal. You had plans for the last days of summer, and back-to-school shopping has its own plans. School supplies, dorm essentials, your list doesn't stop. Neither does the spending. But when you pay in full with PayPal, you can pay over time. No interest, no fees. Check out with PayPal and get back to summer. Subject to approval. Learn more at paypal.com/payinfor. PayPal Inc. NMLS 910457.
This is a Bose moment. You've been there. Small talk's going nowhere, but then the Bose speaker kicks in. Music you can feel fills the room, and no more chat with Danny from accounts. Your life deserves music. Your music deserves Bose. Find your perfect product at Bose.com.
Then, according to Price, the object finally came out. He didn't throw it away. He didn't lose it. He saved it. And this is where the case becomes particularly important because Price eventually gave the object to a scientist. His name was David Pritchard. Pritchard was a physicist associated with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And Pritchard wasn't simply a UFO believer looking for evidence. He was interested in the scientific question. Could physical evidence actually tell us something about the alleged abduction phenomena? And Price had something that could potentially be tested. A tiny object approximately 1 millimeter across and several millimeters long. An alleged alien implant. According to descriptions of the object, it was extremely strange. It was amber-colored, roughly cylindrical, and when examined under a microscope, researchers reportedly saw what appeared to be tiny projections or filaments coming from the object. To someone looking for evidence of extraterrestrial technology, this was tantalizing because imagine what you might expect an alien device to look like. It wouldn't necessarily resemble a little metal box. It would be microscopic, and it could be biological. It could also be something that our technology doesn't even have a name for. If this object really had been inside Price's body since childhood, then we might have been looking at one of the most important pieces of physical evidence in UFO history. At least that's what some researchers hoped. Pritchard began examining the object, and this is where things got complicated. Early descriptions of the object made it sound remarkably exotic. There were reports of a translucent interior, a surrounding whitish material, tiny projections, and a structure that appeared unusual enough to warrant serious scientific examination. The object was eventually subjected to laboratory analysis, and suddenly the UFO community was waiting for an answer. Was this a smoking gun? And was this proof that something non-human had entered our world? And could this tiny object finally establish that at least some alien abduction stories were based on physical reality? The answer was not what everyone expected. The laboratory results indicated that the material contained elements such as carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, and that immediately created a problem, because those are not exotic elements. They're everywhere. They're fundamental components of life on Earth, and eventually the interpretation of the object moved away from extraterrestrial technology. The conclusion associated with the MIT investigation was the object was terrestrial biological origin. In other words, the evidence did not establish that it had come from an alien civilization. And if you're looking at this case from a purely skeptical perspective, that's the end of the story. Alien implant? No. Mystery solved. But you have to ask yourself, is it? Now, here's where I think things get more interesting, because the fact that an object is made from terrestrial material doesn't necessarily tell us how it got there. That's an important distinction. If somebody claims that aliens implanted a device in their body, there are actually two separate questions. First, what is the object? And second, how did it get there? The laboratory analysis may have addressed the first question, but it doesn't automatically answer the second. If the object really was biological material, that doesn't necessarily explain why Price had a foreign body in his penis for years. It doesn't explain why a physician reportedly discovered it, and doesn't necessarily explain Price's claim that it emerged from his body decades later. There is, however, another explanation, and this is where the case takes a fascinating turn. One published account of analysis concluded that the object was essentially human tissue that had formed around fibers from Price's underwear. That seems like a stretch to me, but in other words, the supposed implant might have been a biological growth containing ordinary cotton fibers. Well, that might be possible. The human body can encapsulate foreign material, and cotton fibers can become embedded in tissue, but perhaps there was never an alien implant at all, but perhaps Price had a perfectly terrestrial foreign body reaction. And there's a problem for anyone trying to dismiss the case completely. Price didn't simply discover an object lying on his bedroom floor. He had a long-standing story about an object being placed inside him. The doctor later reportedly found a foreign body, and years afterward, that object emerged. Then scientists actually examined it. Now, that doesn't prove your story, but it does make this more than a simple UFO anecdote. And here's something else I find fascinating. David Pritchard himself wasn't claiming his research had proven aliens were responsible. In fact, Pritchard emphasized that the evidence was inconclusive. He was interested in studying physical evidence precisely because he believed that if the abduction phenomenon were real, eventually there should be something that could withstand scientific scrutiny. And that is the important point. A real scientist doesn't need to begin with the assumption that aliens are real. They need to ask, what does the evidence actually show? And that's why Price's case is so important, because it demonstrates how difficult it is to establish the extraterrestrial hypothesis, even when you have something physical. And believe me, I'd hate to be carrying that thing around in my body for 25 or 30 years. That is a weird one. Let's take a look at one last one here. This last case is the Judi Dench case. Now, that's the pseudonym that Dr. Leir gave the woman for this case. This is a weird one. She found this lump under her arm, and I think Dr. Leir started out as a non-believer, but ended up as puzzled as the rest of us. The case is known as the object that moved under her skin. What would you do if you discovered a lump underneath your skin and then realized you could push it around? Not just a little bit. Not something that simply shifts when you move your arm. Now, I'm talking about an object that appears to move independently beneath your skin. And what if you had no idea what it was? Pretty scary proposition, huh? That's exactly what happened to a woman identified in Dr. Roger Leir's book as Judi Dench. And according to Leir, what happened when he first examined her is one of the strangest encounters he ever had with an alleged alien implant, because at first, Leir didn't believe it was an alien implant at all. He thought it was probably a cyst, and then he touched it. It was sometime in the 1990s when Leir received a telephone call from a woman named Judy. She told him she believed she might have an alien implant in her right arm. Leir immediately became interested, but he wasn't convinced. In fact, based on her initial description, he thought there was a much more ordinary explanation. She told him the object was about the size of a small pea. It was firm. She believed.
This episode is brought to you by PayPal. You had plans for the last days of summer. And back-to-school shopping has its own plans. School supplies, dorm essentials, your list doesn't stop. Neither does the spending. But when you pay in full with PayPal, you can pay over time. No interest, no fees. Check out with PayPal and get back to summer. Subject to approval. Learn more at paypal.com/payinfor. PayPal Inc. NMLS 910457.
This is a Bose moment. You've been there. Small talk's going nowhere, but then the Bose speaker kicks in. Music you can feel fills the room, and no more chat with Jenny from accounts. Your life deserves music. Your music deserves Bose. Find your perfect product at Bose.com.
It had been there for approximately 20 years, and occasionally it caused her pain. But the thing that bothered her most wasn't the pain, it was the fact that the object seemed to move. According to Leir's account, Judy told him that if she reached up with her finger and touched the object, it would actually scoot away underneath her skin. Think about that. Imagine having a lump beneath your skin, you touch it and it moves. Not because you're moving the skin around it, but because the object itself appears to be changing positions. Leir was stunned. He asked her to come to his office, and when she arrived, he finally got to see the thing for himself. Judy rolled up her sleeve. There, approximately 2 inches above her elbow, was a prominent lump underneath the skin. Leir examined it. Then he reached out with his finger and touched it, and according to his account, it moved. Leir said the object suddenly shot across her arm into another location. He froze. For a moment, he didn't know what he was looking at. And remember, this is important, Leir was a medical doctor. His first instinct wasn't, it's an alien. His first instinct was to find out a medical explanation. He considered the possibility that it might be a cyst. Perhaps there was some kind of channel or track between the skin. Maybe touching it from one direction had simply displaced it. So Leir touched it again. And he expected it to move back, but it didn't. Instead, it moved somewhere else, and then somewhere else again. According to Leir, he discovered that the object could move anywhere within an area approximately 2.5 inches in diameter. He described it as the strangest subcutaneous lesion he had encountered during his decades of medical practice. And at that point, he knew he was dealing with something unusual. The question was, what was it? Judy told Leir that the object had been bothering her for years. She wanted it removed. But before Leir would perform the surgery, he wanted more information. If this was truly an implant connected to an alleged UFO encounter, there should be some history behind it. So he began asking questions, and Judy told him about an experience she believed might have been connected. She wasn't initially certain that what happened to her was a genuine UFO encounter. That detail was important. She wasn't walking into Leir's office claiming, "I know aliens implanted me." She was essentially saying, "I have this strange object in my arm, and I have one strange experience in my past that might be connected." That was enough for Leir to investigate further. Now, this is where the story becomes especially interesting from the believer's perspective, because if Judy had simply told Leir about an alien abduction and then claimed she had an implant, you could argue that she was interpreting an unexplained medical condition through the UFO phenomena. But Leir says he personally observed the object moving beneath her skin. He couldn't explain the movement, and he wasn't prepared to immediately label it extraterrestrial. He first wanted to know what it actually was. So the decision was made. They would take x-rays, and eventually they would remove the object. Imagine the situation. A doctor is preparing to operate on a woman who claims that something has been moving underneath her skin for approximately 20 years. There's an actual physical lump. It's visible. It's palpable. And according to the surgeon, it moves. If this is an ordinary medical condition, surgery should reveal what it is. If it is a foreign object, they'll be able to examine it. And if it's something truly inexplicable, well, they might have something very important. Leir's broader implant research had already produced strange findings. Several of the objects removed from alleged abductees were reportedly surrounded by a dark gray biological membrane. According to his book, laboratory examination of some of these membranes identified protein, coagulum, hemosiderin, and keratin. Leir was particularly interested in the fact that the tissues surrounding some of the objects reportedly showed little or no conventional inflammatory response. To Leir, that raised a profound possibility. What if these objects weren't simply pieces of metal accidentally lodged into someone's body? What if something had been deliberately designed to coexist with human tissue? And then came the surgery. The object was removed, and once it was outside the human body, the mystery only became stranger. Leir reported that some of the objects recovered during his series of surgeries had unusual characteristics. Several were covered with the same dark, dense membrane. Others displayed unusual shapes or materials. One later case produced an object that looked like crystal or glass. By January 1998, Leir reported that his team had performed 7 surgeries and recovered multiple objects they considered suspicious. But Judy's case was particularly interesting because of the behavior of the object before it was removed. It moved. Now, if we're going to take the extraterrestrial hypothesis seriously, we'll have to ask an obvious question. Why would an implant move? And what would be the purpose? Could it be a tracking device? Could it respond to pressure? Could it be designed to move through tissue? Could it somehow be interacting with nerves? Could it have been designed to migrate to different locations? Or, and this is the really disturbing possibility, could the movement have been intentional? Maybe what Judy was feeling wasn't a malfunction. Maybe the object was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Leir himself eventually speculated about the possible functions for the alleged implants. He considered the possibility that they could act as tracking devices or transponders. He also considered whether they could monitor biological changes, perhaps genetic changes, perhaps environmental contaminants, perhaps something else entirely. He even discussed the possibility that some could influence behavior. Those were theories, not established findings, but if these objects really were engineered by an intelligence more advanced than ours, we shouldn't necessarily expect to understand their purpose. A radio from 1920 would look like magic to someone living in the Middle Ages, so imagine what a piece of technology thousands of years ahead of ours might look like. We might not even recognize it as technology. And then there's another fascinating detail. According to Leir'S research, several of the alleged implants were found on the left side of the body. Several objects reportedly fluoresced under ultraviolet light, and Leir claimed that the tissues surrounding some of the objects contained unusual concentrations of nerve cells. He believed these findings might eventually reveal how the objects interacted with the human body. Could these alleged implants communicate with the nervous system? Could they monitor the body? Could they transmit information? And could they be some kind of biological interface? Again, we don't know, but those are exactly the questions that make the implant phenomena so fascinating. Now, there's another reason I find the Judi Dench case compelling. Leir wasn't an amateur investigator with the metal detector. He was a practicing podiatric surgeon, and according to his own account, he initially thought Judy's lump was probably a cyst. He had no reason to immediately conclude that she had been implanted by aliens. But when he touched the lump and watched it move beneath her skin, his opinion changed. He realized he was dealing with something he couldn't easily explain. And that is one of the things that I find most interesting about physical UFO cases. The best evidence isn't necessarily the story someone tells you. It's the moment when an experienced professional encounters something that doesn't fit their expectations. Some people might say this was just a cyst, but if that's the case, you have to ask yourself, why did it behave the way Leir described? And if it wasn't a cyst, what exactly was moving around inside Judy's arms? Wow, these cases are all so strange, I think. There has been some limited study done on the metallurgy involved. There has been some limited study just done about what these things are in general. Makes you wonder how many of these have ended up in a lab somewhere that we don't even know about it. There's cases where I've heard that they broadcast at certain frequencies, cases where they seem to be in contact with something else, and then as soon as they're taken out, they quit broadcasting. A lot of weird stuff. I'm wishing Dr. Leir was still around, or somebody like him was still around, because he was certainly a treasure taking out these alien implants. Hey, if you like the program, don't forget to hit like, follow, subscribe. Doesn't cost a dime. Until next time, this is UFO Warning. Over and out.